She never spoke during the entire flight. Passengers forgot she existed. But when F-16 fighter pilots desperately cried for help during a crisis, and deadly A-10 Thunderbolt aircraft roared into action, this silent woman revealed a shocking secret. What she did next left military pilots speechless and saved hundreds of lives. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The woman in seat 17B had not spoken a single word since boarding the aircraft 3 hours ago. Not one syllable had passed her lips during the entire flight from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. Flight attendants had stopped asking if she needed anything after the third polite head shake, and the businessman in 17A had given up trying to make small talk somewhere over Nevada. She simply sat there, looking out the window with eyes that seemed to see something far beyond the clouds, her hands folded quietly in her lap, her entire presence so unremarkable that people forgot she was there within minutes of noticing her. Her name was Emma Walsh, though nobody on the plane knew that. Nobody knew anything about her because she had made absolutely certain they would not. The flight attendants had whispered to each other near the galley that the woman in 17B must want complete privacy, perhaps dealing with some personal tragedy or simply preferring solitude. The elderly lady in 17C had tried once to offer a mint, receiving only a gentle smile and slight head shake in response, after which she returned to her book and forgot the silent woman existed. Even the child kicking the seat behind her eventually stopped because there was no reaction to provoke, no satisfaction to gain from bothering someone who seemed to barely register the physical world around her. What none of them could possibly know was that Emma Walsh was not antisocial or grieving or lost in thought about ordinary problems. She was listening. Always listening. Her ears were tuned to frequencies most people never noticed, her brain processing sounds and patterns that civilians filtered out as background noise. The hum of the engines told her they were running perfectly. The slight changes in air pressure indicated weather patterns ahead. The captain's intercom announcements revealed stress levels and decision-making processes. She absorbed everything while appearing to notice nothing, a habit burned into her neural pathways by 12 years of military aviation training that had made her one of the most feared close air support pilots in modern warfare. The Airbus A320 maintained its steady cruise at 37,000 feet, and Emma continued her silent vigil by the window. She wore simple jeans and a plain gray sweater, nothing that would draw attention, nothing that would make anyone suspect that the quiet woman who would not even order a drink had once commanded an A-10 Thunderbolt II through hostile skies while providing life-saving fire support to troops pinned down by enemy forces. Her hands, resting so peacefully in her lap, had pulled the trigger on the most powerful rotary cannon ever mounted on an aircraft, sending thousands of 30mm rounds downrange with accuracy that saved countless lives on battlefields across 3 continents. But that was a different life, and Emma had left it behind 6 months ago. Or tried to. The problem with being an A-10 pilot was that you never really stopped being an A-10 pilot. The aircraft got into your blood, into your bones, into the way you saw the world. While F-16 pilots thought about speed and air superiority, while bomber crews thought about strategic targets, A-10 pilots thought about the troops on the ground. Always the troops. Every mission, every training exercise, every moment in the cockpit was about one thing: keeping soldiers alive when they were in the worst possible situations. That mindset did not simply disappear when you took off the uniform. The flight attendant passed by again, barely glancing at the silent woman in 17B who required nothing and said nothing. Emma appreciated being invisible. After years of being Reaper 6, the call sign that made enemy forces scatter and friendly forces cheer, being completely unremarkable felt like a vacation. No radio chatter demanding immediate action. No ground commanders screaming coordinates while under fire. No desperate voices begging for close air support because they were about to be overrun. Just silence and clouds and the peaceful hum of commercial airline engines that would never know combat. Except the silence was about to end in a way that nobody on that aircraft could have predicted. The first indication that something was wrong came through Emma's phone. She had left it in airplane mode like everyone else, but her old military contacts knew how to reach her through emergency channels that did not depend on civilian networks. The phone vibrated once, then twice, then began displaying a series of encrypted messages that made her blood run cold. She read them quickly, her expression never changing, her body language remaining completely neutral even as her mind shifted instantly from civilian mode to combat awareness. Military emergency developing 200 miles northeast, hostile ground situation, civilian aircraft in potential danger zone. F-16 fighters scrambled for assessment. Possible mass casualty event, all available tactical assets being mobilized. Emma's fingers moved across her phone screen, accessing channels that legally she should not have had access to anymore but which her former commanders had insisted she maintain for exactly this kind of situation. What she found made her understand why they had contacted her. The emergency was not just serious. It was the exact type of scenario that F-16 pilots were not trained to handle and that required the specific expertise of A-10 Thunderbolt II operations. A terrorist cell had taken over a remote airfield being used as an evacuation point for American citizens fleeing a sudden political crisis. Hundreds of civilians were trapped, with hostile forces using heavy weapons to prevent any rescue attempt. F-16 Fighting Falcons had been scrambled because they were the fastest response, designed to reach crisis zones in minutes with their incredible speed and power. But F-16s were air superiority fighters, built to dominate the skies and engage other aircraft or strike strategic targets with precision weapons. They were not designed for close air support against ground targets that were dangerously close to friendly forces. Through her phone's encrypted connection, Emma could hear the tactical frequency that the F-16 pilots were using. The lead pilot's voice came through tense and frustrated. "Command, this is Falcon 1. We have visual on the target area. Multiple hostile positions with heavy weapons surrounding the airfield. Civilians are trapped in 3 hangars on the north side. We cannot engage with our current loadout without unacceptable risk to friendlies. The targets are too close. We need close air support assets. We need A-10 capabilities. Repeat, we need Warthog support immediately." Another voice responded, this one belonging to Falcon 2. "Command, these tangos are dug in with anti-aircraft positions. They know we're fast movers and they're using the civilians as shields. Standard F-16 tactics won't work here. We're looking at a low and slow scenario with danger close fire support requirements. This is not our mission set. Where are the A-10s?" Emma's jaw tightened slightly, the only outward sign of her internal response. She knew exactly what those F-16 pilots were facing. The F-16 Fighting Falcon was an incredible aircraft, one of the most successful fighter jets ever built, capable of speeds exceeding Mach 2 and equipped with sophisticated weapons systems. But it was designed to move fast, strike hard, and get out. The pilots spent their training learning air-to-air combat, high-speed bombing runs, and precision strikes against fixed targets. They did not train for the grinding, dangerous, low-altitude close air support missions that defined A-10 operations. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, the aircraft Emma had flown for over a decade, was the opposite in almost every way. It was slow, subsonic, designed to loiter over battlefields for hours while providing continuous support to troops in contact. Its armor could withstand direct hits from anti-aircraft fire. Its GAU-8 Avenger 30mm rotary cannon could destroy tanks, fortified positions, and enemy vehicles with devastating precision. Most importantly, A-10 pilots trained constantly for danger-close scenarios where friendly forces were meters away from enemy positions and where a single mistake could mean killing the people you were trying to save. The tactical frequency crackled again. "Command, Falcon 1. We are not equipped or trained for this mission. Our weapons are too powerful and too fast for this environment. We need gun runs, low-altitude passes, and sustained fire on multiple dispersed targets while avoiding 3 separate civilian locations. This requires A-10 capabilities and A-10 pilot training. What is the ETA on Warthog assets?" The response from command made Emma close her eyes briefly. "Falcon 1, nearest A-10 squadron is currently 3 hours away minimum. They were conducting training exercises in a different theater and are returning as fast as possible. You need to maintain coverage until they arrive. 3 hours. Emma knew what that meant. The F-16 pilots would circle overhead, unable to effectively engage, while hostile forces either killed the civilians or prepared positions that would make even an A-10 assault far more dangerous. Every minute that passed without proper close air support increased the body count. This was exactly the kind of situation that created the desperate radio calls she had heard so many times in her career, ground forces or civilians screaming for help while aircraft overhead could not provide the specific type of support needed. Falcon 1's voice returned, and now Emma could hear something she recognized immediately, the controlled fear of a pilot who knew people were dying and he could not save them with the tools he had. Command, we cannot hold this position effectively for 3 hours. The tangos are already moving on the civilian positions. We need someone who knows close air support coordination. We need someone who can talk us through A-10 tactics with F-16 capabilities. We need a Warthog driver advising immediately. That was when Emma made her decision. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up for the first time since takeoff, startling the businessmen in 17A who had forgotten she existed. She moved down the aisle with purpose, her silent passivity replaced by focused determination that made people unconsciously move out of her way. The flight attendants looked up in surprise as the woman who had not spoken a single word suddenly walked straight into the cockpit area and knocked firmly on the door. The senior flight attendant moved to intercept her. "Ma'am, you cannot be here. Please return to your seat." Emma spoke for the first time, her voice calm but carrying absolute authority. "I need to speak with the captain immediately. This is a national security emergency. I am former military and I have information critical to an ongoing operation." The flight attendant's expression shifted from annoyance to confusion to concern. Something about the way this woman spoke, the certainty in her voice, the complete transformation from silent passenger to military professional, made her hesitate. "Ma'am, I don't understand. What kind of emergency?" "There is a military crisis developing that affects this aircraft's flight path and potentially our safety. I need to coordinate with the captain now. My name is Emma Walsh. My call sign was Reaper 6. I flew A-10 Thunderbolt 2 close air support missions for 12 years. Check with air traffic control. They will confirm there is an active military emergency in progress and that my expertise is needed immediately." The captain had been listening through the door and now opened it, his face showing skepticism mixed with curiosity. "I'm Captain Anderson. You're saying you're a military pilot? We have not received any alerts about our flight path being affected." Emma met his eyes with the steady gaze of someone who had made life-and-death decisions at 300 feet above hostile territory. "Captain, you will receive those alerts in approximately 4 minutes when military command updates all civilian aircraft about the crisis zone. But I do not have 4 minutes. There are F-16 fighters 200 miles northeast trying to provide close air support for a civilian rescue operation, and they are not trained for that mission. People are going to die unless someone with A-10 experience can advise them on how to adapt their tactics. I need access to military tactical frequencies immediately." Captain Anderson studied her for a long moment. He had flown for the Navy before transitioning to commercial aviation, and he recognized the bearing, the terminology, the absolute confidence of someone who had actually done what she claimed. "You're serious. You're actually a combat pilot." "I was. And right now, I'm the only A-10 pilot within range who can help those F-16 drivers figure out how to save those civilians. I need your radio system and I need it now." The captain made his decision. "Come in. Use whatever you need." He turned to his co-pilot. "Contact ATC. Confirm there's a military emergency in the area she described." To Emma, he said, "Our radio system can access military frequencies if you know the right channels." Emma was already moving, her hands flying across the radio controls with the ease of thousands of hours of practice. She input the encrypted tactical frequency she had been monitoring on her phone, and suddenly the cockpit filled with the sounds of the F-16 pilots coordinating their increasingly desperate attempts to find a solution. Falcon 1 was speaking. "We've identified the primary threat positions, but we cannot engage without danger to civilians. The hostiles have heavy machine guns and what looks like shoulder-fired missiles in 3 separate locations, all within 200 meters of the hangars where the civilians are trapped. Standard attack profiles put us at risk and put the friendlies at even greater risk." Emma keyed the microphone, her voice cutting through the tactical chatter with calm authority. "Falcon 1, Falcon 2, this is Reaper 6. I'm a former A-10 pilot monitoring your situation. I can advise on close air support tactics adapted for your capabilities. Do you copy?" There was a moment of shocked silence on the frequency. Then Falcon 1 responded, his voice filled with desperate hope. "Reaper 6, Falcon 1. We copy. Who are you and where are you transmitting from?" "Falcon 1, I'm currently on a commercial flight but I have access to military frequencies and I have 12 years of A-10 close air support experience including hundreds of danger close missions. I know you're not trained for this, but I can walk you through it. First, I need you to describe your current loadout and your altitude." Falcon 2 responded immediately. "Reaper 6, Falcon 2 here. We're carrying AIM-120s for air-to-air, and we each have 2 GBU-12 paveway laser-guided bombs. We're at 15,000 feet, standard combat air patrol altitude. But those bombs are 500-pounders. We cannot drop them anywhere near those civilians." Emma's mind was already working through the tactical problem, seeing it the way an A-10 pilot would see it. "Falcon 2, you're thinking like an F-16 driver, which is your training, but it's not going to work here. You need to think like a warthog. First, you need to get low. I know that goes against everything you've learned about keeping your speed and altitude, but close air support requires visual identification and precise engagement. You need to see exactly what you're shooting at." Falcon 1 responded, uncertainty clear in his voice. "Reaper 6, we're in an F-16. Low and slow puts us in the engagement envelope of those anti-aircraft weapons. The A-10 has armor. We don't. Falcon 1, I understand that concern. But those hostiles are using heavy machine guns and possibly shoulder-fired missiles, not radar-guided systems. They're designed to engage helicopters and slow aircraft, not F-16s. Your speed is your armor. I'm going to teach you the A-10 tactic of pop-up attacks. You come in low and fast, pop up to acquire your target, engage, and drop back down before they can track you. It's not your standard attack profile, but it will work." Captain Anderson was listening to the exchange with growing respect. The co-pilot had confirmed the military emergency with ATC, and the captain now understood that his silent passenger was not exaggerating her credentials. He watched as Emma coordinated the tactical response with the ease of someone who had done this countless times before. Emma continued, her voice steady and professional. "Falcon 1, Falcon 2, here's what we're going to do. The A-10s are still 3 hours out, but we can set this up for them while protecting those civilians right now. First, I need you to make a low pass, 500 feet, and give me detailed positions on all hostile locations relative to the civilian hangars. Use standard close air support reference points. Clock positions from the hangars." Falcon 1 acknowledged and Emma could hear the F-16's engines change pitch as the pilot pushed the aircraft into a dive. "Reaper 6, Falcon 1 descending to 500 feet. This feels wrong in every way, but I trust you know what you're doing. Falcon 1, you're doing fine. Remember, you have speed. They cannot track you fast enough to get a solid lock. Make your pass, give me the intel, and climb back to safety. This is reconnaissance, not engagement." The next 90 seconds were tense as Falcon 1 made his low pass. Emma could hear the concentration in his voice as he reported back. "Reaper 6, I have 3 hostile positions. Primary threat is at the 2 o'clock position from the main hangar, approximately 150 meters out. Heavy machine gun in a fortified position. Secondary threat at 7 o'clock, 200 meters, looks like a technical vehicle with mounted weapons. Third threat at 11 o'clock, 100 meters, infantry with possible shoulder-fired missiles. Emma processed the information instantly, visualizing the battlefield in her mind the way she had done hundreds of times before. Good pass, Falcon 1. Now here's the problem you're facing. Those positions are danger close to the civilians, which is why you cannot use your GBU-12s. But you're thinking about those weapons wrong. You're thinking about them as 500-pound bombs, which they are, but you're not thinking about precision. Falcon 2 interjected. Reaper 6, with all respect, a 500-pound bomb is a 500-pound bomb. The blast radius doesn't care how precise we are. Falcon 2, you're partially right. But here's what I learned in the A-10 community. It's not just about the weapon. It's about the angle, the delivery, and the target selection. Those GBU-12s can be devastating or they can be surgical depending on how you use them. What's the construction of those hostile positions? Falcon 1 responded. The 2 o'clock position is sandbagged with what looks like metal sheeting for overhead cover. The 7 o'clock technical is in the open. The 11 o'clock infantry is using abandoned vehicles for cover. Emma's eyes narrowed in concentration. Perfect. Here's what we're going to do. That technical at 7 o'clock is your primary target because it's in the open and furthest from civilians. Falcon 2, you're going to take that target with a single GBU-12. But here's the critical part, you're going to deliver it at a shallow angle, not a steep dive. Come in low, designate the target, and let the bomb impact almost horizontally. That will direct the blast energy away from the civilian position. There was a pause. Then Falcon 2 said, Reaper 6, that's not standard F-16 bombing procedure. We typically come in at a 45-degree angle or steeper for optimal accuracy. Falcon 2, I know it's not standard for you. But in the A-10, we learned that angle of attack matters as much as accuracy when you're danger close to friendlies. A horizontal impact will create a directional blast pattern. The fragmentation will spread outward from the impact point but the main blast energy will travel along the impact vector, away from the civilians. It's basic physics applied to tactical situations. Captain Anderson whispered to Emma, do you really think this will work? Emma did not take her eyes off the radio controls. Captain, I've seen A-10 pilots put 2,000-pound bombs within 50 meters of friendly forces using these exact principles. The F-16's laser guidance is actually more accurate than what we had in the Warthog. The physics work. The question is whether these pilots can execute. Falcon 2 spoke again, this time with determination replacing doubt. Reaper 6, Falcon 2. I'm setting up my approach now. Low altitude, shallow angle, horizontal impact on the technical at 7 o'clock, designating target. Emma listened to the tactical callouts as Falcon 2 lined up his attack. She could hear the stress in his voice, the uncertainty of doing something that went against his training. But she could also hear him trusting her guidance, following the instructions of someone who had done this type of mission more times than most pilots could imagine. Target locked. Weapon released. Tracking, impact in 5 seconds. The explosion came through the radio as a distant rumble. Then Falcon 1's voice, filled with amazement. Reaper 6, that was incredible. The technical is destroyed. The blast went almost perfectly horizontal. Minimal fragmentation toward the civilian position. How did you know that would work? Falcon 1, I've been doing close air support since before you learned to fly. The weapons are different but the principles are the same. Now we've eliminated the most dangerous threat and we've shown the other hostiles that you can engage effectively. That changes their tactical calculation. They thought they were safe using the civilians as shields. Now they know they're not. Falcon 2 added, Reaper 6, the remaining hostile positions are reacting. The infantry at 11 o'clock is moving away from the civilians, and the heavy machine gun at 2 o'clock has stopped firing. They're scared. Emma allowed herself a small smile. Good. Fear is a tactical advantage. Now here's what happens next. Falcon 1, you're going to make another low pass and I want you to use your cannon. Not to destroy anything, but to make a statement. Falcon 1 sounded confused. Reaper 6, the F-16's M61 Vulcan is a 20mm. It's designed for air-to-air combat, not ground support. The A-10's GAU-8 is 30mm and specifically designed for ground targets. Falcon 1, I know your cannon is not the Avenger. But it will work for what we need. The hostiles don't know the difference between 20mm and 30mm when it's screaming past their positions. You're going to make a gun run on the 2 o'clock position, but you're going to deliberately aim your rounds to impact 50 meters in front of their position. You're not trying to kill them. You're showing them that you have the accuracy to kill them whenever you choose. It's psychological warfare. Captain Anderson leaned closer. That's brilliant. You're using the threat of precision rather than actual destruction. Emma nodded without looking away from the radio. In close air support, sometimes the most effective weapon is the enemy's imagination. If they think we can drop rounds exactly where we want them, they'll break and run rather than test that theory. Falcon 1 was already setting up his approach. Reaper 6, Falcon 1 commencing gun run on 2 o'clock position. Low altitude pass, 50 meters forward of target position, full burst. The sound of the F-16's cannon firing came through the radio like a buzzsaw, shorter and higher pitched than the deep roar of the A-10's GAU-8 but still terrifying to anyone on the receiving end. Falcon 1 pulled up and reported, rounds on target, 50 meters forward as instructed. The hostile position is. Reaper 6, they're running. The machine gun crew just abandoned their position and they're fleeing south away from the civilians. Emma felt the familiar satisfaction of a close air support mission going exactly as planned. Falcon 1, excellent execution. Now we have one hostile position left at 11 o'clock. The infantry with possible shoulder-fired missiles. That's your most dangerous remaining threat because those missiles can actually hurt an F-16. We're going to handle them differently. Falcon 2 asked, what's the plan, Reaper 6? Falcon 2, you're going to orbit overhead at 15,000 feet and keep your laser on that 11 o'clock position. Don't attack, just paint them with your targeting laser. Meanwhile, Falcon 1 is going to make another low pass and you're going to use your radio to broadcast a message on all frequencies that those hostiles might be monitoring. Falcon 1 responded immediately. What message? Emma's voice hardened. You're going to tell them that they are currently being targeted by laser-guided munitions and that they have 60 seconds to abandon their weapons and surrender or they will be destroyed. You're going to tell them that the civilian positions are now under the protection of United States Air Force assets and any hostile action will result in immediate and overwhelming response. You're going to tell them that A-10 Thunderbolt II aircraft are inbound and that if they're still in position when the Warthogs arrive, they will experience the full capability of the GAU-8 Avenger cannon. There was a moment of silence. Then Falcon 2 said quietly, Reaper 6, you're betting that the reputation of the A-10 will make them surrender without a fight. Falcon 2, I'm betting that anyone who knows anything about military aviation understands that facing an A-10 in a ground fight is a death sentence. The Warthog is famous worldwide for a reason. Every military force on Earth knows what that aircraft can do. The psychological impact of knowing A-10s are coming is worth more than actually shooting at these targets. Falcon 1 transmitted the message on all frequencies, his voice carrying the absolute conviction of someone delivering an unavoidable truth. Emma listened as he explained exactly what was about to happen to anyone remaining in hostile positions when the A-10s arrived, detailing the 30mm cannon that could destroy tanks, the ability to loiter overhead for hours, the armor that made the aircraft nearly impossible to shoot down with the weapons they possessed. 90 seconds later, Falcon 1 reported back with something close to awe in his voice. Reaper 6, the infantry at 11 o'clock just dropped their weapons and they're running. All hostile positions are now abandoned. The civilians are safe. You just coordinated a close air support mission using F-16s like they were A-10s, and you did it without killing anyone except that technical crew. How is that even possible? Emma leaned back slightly, feeling the weight of the last 30 minutes settle on her shoulders. Falcon 1, close air support is not just about destroying targets. It's about protecting people. Sometimes that means killing the enemy. Sometimes it means scaring them so badly they choose to run instead of fight. The A-10 community learned a long time ago that the most effective weapon is the one you don't have to fire. You too just learned that lesson in F-16s. The military command frequency crackled to life with a new voice, this one belonging to a senior officer. Reaper 6, this is Colonel Martinez, commanding officer of the 347th Fighter Wing. I've been monitoring this tactical coordination. Can you identify yourself fully? Emma straightened unconsciously, old military habits reasserting themselves. Colonel Martinez, this is former Captain Emma Walsh, call sign Reaper 6, formerly of the 75th Fighter Squadron, 23rd Fighter Group. I flew A-10 Thunderbolt 2 close air support missions for 12 years before retiring 6 months ago. I was monitoring the situation and provided tactical advice to your F-16 pilots based on my A-10 experience. There was a long pause. Then Colonel Martinez spoke again, his voice filled with something between respect and disbelief. Captain Walsh, Reaper 6, your record just came up on my screen. 437 close air support missions. 1,700 combat hours in the A-10. 3 distinguished flying crosses. 2 bronze stars. You're not just a former A-10 pilot. You're a legend in the close air support community. Every ground unit that served in theater during your active years knows your call sign. When you broadcast that the warthogs were coming, you weren't making an empty threat. You were invoking your own reputation. Emma felt uncomfortable with the praise. Colonel, I just did what any A-10 driver would do. Those F-16 pilots had a close air support problem and they needed someone who understood the mission. The credit belongs to Falcon 1 and Falcon 2 for trusting guidance that went against their training. Falcon 1 interjected. Reaper 6, with all respect, we were about to watch civilians die because we didn't have the right tools or the right training. You gave us both. You taught us how to think like A-10 pilots even though we're flying F-16s. That's not just tactical advice. That's combat aviation education compressed into 30 minutes of radio transmission. Colonel Martinez spoke again. Captain Walsh, where exactly are you transmitting from? Your signal is coming from a civilian aircraft. Captain Anderson took the microphone from Emma. Colonel Martinez, this is Captain Robert Anderson, commercial pilot. Captain Walsh is a passenger on my aircraft. She accessed our radio system to provide tactical coordination because she was the only A-10 qualified pilot in range. I gave her permission to use our equipment once I verified the emergency. Captain Anderson, you made the right call. Captain Walsh, the A-10 squadron is now 90 minutes out instead of 3 hours. They received your tactical assessment and pushed their return flight to maximum speed. When they arrive, they'll find the situation already stabilized thanks to your coordination. The civilians are being extracted now under F-16 cover. You saved a lot of lives today without ever leaving your commercial flight. Emma felt the familiar mix of satisfaction and exhaustion that came with successful close air support missions. Colonel, those F-16 pilots did the actual work. I just helped them adapt tactics they already knew how to execute. Falcon 1 and Falcon 2 deserve the recognition. Falcon 2 responded immediately. Reaper 6, we were trained for air superiority and precision strikes. You taught us close air support in real time during an actual emergency. That's something we'll carry for the rest of our careers. Every time we see an A-10, we're going to remember the day a Warthog pilot taught us how to think like Warthog pilots even from a commercial aircraft. Thank you. The radio coordination continued for another 20 minutes as Emma helped Falcon 1 and Falcon 2 establish a secure perimeter around the evacuation point and coordinate with the incoming A-10 squadron. She provided detailed briefings about the terrain, the abandoned hostile positions, and the best approach vectors for the Thunderbolt IIs when they arrived. She was doing what she had always done, making sure everyone had the information they needed to stay alive and complete the mission successfully. Finally, Colonel Martinez closed the tactical frequency. Reaper 6, we have control of the situation now. The civilians are safe, the A-10s are inbound to establish permanent coverage, and your tactical coordination has been logged as a significant contribution to this operation. On behalf of the United States Air Force and the civilians whose lives you saved today, thank you for your service. Both past and present. Emma handed the microphone back to Captain Anderson and suddenly felt the weight of every eye in the cockpit. The captain was looking at her with a respect that went far beyond the normal passenger-pilot relationship. Captain Walsh, that was extraordinary. You just coordinated a military rescue operation from a commercial aircraft using nothing but a radio and 12 years of combat experience. Those F-16 pilots sounded like they would follow you into hell if you asked them to. Captain Anderson, I appreciate the sentiment, but I just did what A-10 pilots are trained to do. We support the people who need help. Sometimes those people are soldiers under fire. Sometimes they're civilians trapped by hostile forces. Sometimes they're F-16 pilots trying to execute a mission they were never trained for. The aircraft doesn't matter. The principle is the same. As Emma walked back to her seat, she noticed that the entire cabin had gone silent. The passengers who had ignored her for 3 hours were now staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to awe. The businessman in 17A who had given up trying to make conversation was pressed against the window to give her space, his mouth slightly open. The elderly lady in 17C was clutching her book with white knuckles, clearly having heard at least some of the radio traffic through the open cockpit door. Emma sat down and buckled her seatbelt, trying to return to the invisibility she had maintained for the entire flight. But the cabin atmosphere had changed completely. Whispers spread from row to row as passengers shared what little they had heard or understood. The flight attendants looked at her with a mix of respect and confusion, clearly unsure how to treat someone who had just saved lives using their aircraft's communication system. The businessman finally found his voice. You're a military pilot. A combat pilot. You were actually coordinating a rescue mission from this plane. Emma turned to look at him directly for the first time since boarding. I was a military pilot. Now I'm just a passenger trying to get to Washington, D.C. Just a passenger, he repeated slowly. You spent 3 hours not saying a word and then you coordinated a military operation that saved civilians from terrorists using tactics that F-16 pilots had never heard of before. That's not just a passenger. That's something else entirely. The elderly lady leaned forward from 17C. Dear, I heard some of what you were saying. Something about A-10 aircraft and close air support. My grandson is in the army. He told me once that A-10 pilots are the ones soldiers pray for when they're in trouble. He said the sound of the A-10's cannon is the most beautiful sound in the world if you're a soldier surrounded by enemies. Was that you? Were you one of those pilots? Emma felt the familiar conflict between wanting anonymity and honoring the truth of what she had done. Yes, ma'am. I flew A-10s for 12 years. Close air support was my mission. Supporting troops in contact with the enemy. The elderly lady's eyes filled with tears. My grandson was in Afghanistan. He told me about a mission where his unit was surrounded and they called for help. He said an A-10 pilot came in so low and so accurate that the enemy broke and ran. He said that pilot saved his entire unit. He never told me the call sign, but he said he would never forget that day. Was that the kind of thing you did? Yes, ma'am. That was exactly the kind of thing I did. Many times. The woman reached across and took Emma's hand, squeezing it gently. Then thank you. Thank you for my grandson. Thank you for all the soldiers you brought home safely. Thank you for being willing to fly into danger to protect people you had never met. Emma felt her throat tighten slightly. This was why she had left the military, why she had sought anonymity. The weight of gratitude was sometimes harder to carry than the weight of responsibility. You're welcome, ma'am. It was an honor to serve. For the next hour, Emma answered quiet questions from nearby passengers who had overheard the conversation. She explained what an A-10 was, what close air support meant, why F-16 pilots needed her help with that specific type of mission. She kept her answers simple and factual, avoiding the dramatic details that would have made her service sound more heroic than it felt to her. But the passengers understood that something extraordinary had happened on their flight, that the silent woman in 17B had casually coordinated a military operation while they watched movies and slept. Captain Anderson made an announcement over the intercom as they began their descent into Washington, D.C. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I want to inform you that during our flight, we had the privilege of having a distinguished military veteran on board. This individual provided critical tactical coordination for a military rescue operation that saved civilian lives. While I cannot share specific details due to operational security, I want you to know that your safety and the safety of others was in excellent hands today. On behalf of the flight crew and all passengers, we thank this individual for their service to our nation. The cabin erupted in spontaneous applause. Emma felt her face flush as passengers turned to look at her, many having figured out who the captain was talking about. She nodded politely but said nothing, maintaining the quiet dignity that had defined her military career. As the aircraft touched down and taxied to the gate, Emma saw something that made her breath catch. Parked on the military side of the airport were two F-16 Fighting Falcons, and next to them, engines still cooling from a high-speed flight, were four A-10 Thunderbolt IIs. Their distinctive twin engines and straight wings were unmistakable even from a distance. The Warthogs had arrived at the rescue site, completed their mission, and returned to base. Captain Anderson came on the intercom one final time. Captain Walsh, if you could please remain seated after landing. We have a special arrival procedure for you. Emma felt a mix of anticipation and uncertainty as the other passengers deplaned, many pausing to shake her hand or thank her personally. When the cabin was finally empty except for flight crew, Captain Anderson emerged from the cockpit and gestured toward the exit. Captain Walsh, there are some people who would like to meet you. Emma walked to the door and stopped. Standing on the jetway were 6 pilots in flight suits. 2 wore the patches of an F-16 squadron. 4 wore the distinctive patches of an A-10 unit, complete with the fierce Warthog emblem that made the aircraft famous. In front of them stood a colonel with silver eagles on his shoulders. Colonel Martinez stepped forward and saluted. Emma automatically returned the salute despite being in civilian clothes. Captain Walsh, Reaper 6. On behalf of the United States Air Force and the civilians you helped rescue today, I wanted to personally thank you. Your tactical coordination allowed our F-16 pilots to successfully protect evacuation operations using adapted close air support techniques. The A-10 squadron arrived to find the situation stabilized and ready for their specialized capabilities. Your expertise bridged a critical gap in our response. One of the F-16 pilots, a young man with captain's bars, stepped forward. Ma'am, I'm Falcon 1. Captain Jake Morrison. I just wanted to shake your hand and tell you that you taught me more about close air support in 30 minutes than I learned in my entire tactical training. You helped me save lives using an aircraft that was never designed for that mission. I'll never forget that. The second F-16 pilot, also a captain, added, Ma'am, Falcon 2, Captain Sarah Chin. You were right about everything. The angles, the psychology, the tactics. When we train from now on, we're going to remember that sometimes you have to think beyond your aircraft's primary mission. You showed us that an F-16 can do close air support if the pilot understands the principles. Thank you for that lesson. Then the A-10 pilot stepped forward, and Emma felt a rush of emotion seeing the patches and insignia she had worn for so many years. The lead pilot, a lieutenant colonel, extended his hand. "Captain Walsh, I'm Lieutenant Colonel James Rodriguez, commanding officer of the 75th Fighter Squadron." "Your old squadron, ma'am. We still tell stories about Reaper 6. When we got the call that you were providing tactical coordination from a commercial aircraft, using F-16s like they were warthogs, we pushed our birds to maximum speed to get there. We wanted to see the mission you set up. It was perfect, ma'am. Textbook close air support principles applied to a completely different aircraft. You represented the A-10 community with honor today." Emma felt tears threatening for the first time. "Colonel Rodriguez, those F-16 pilots did the hard work. They trusted guidance that went against their training and they executed perfectly. The credit belongs to them. Ma'am, with respect, the credit belongs to 12 years of A-10 experience that you compressed into a real-time tactical lesson. You proved today that close air support is not about the aircraft. It's about the principles, the mindset, the absolute commitment to protecting people on the ground. That's what makes an A-10 pilot, and that's what you'll always be, no matter what aircraft you're flying or what seat you're sitting in." Colonel Martinez handed Emma a small box. "Captain Walsh, this is not official yet, but I've been authorized to present you with a letter of commendation for your actions today. The formal award will follow through proper channels, but I wanted you to know that your service did not end when you took off the uniform. You proved today that Reaper 6 is always on call when lives are at stake." Emma accepted the box but could not find words to respond. The colonel continued, "Captain Walsh, I also have a question for you. The Air Force is always looking for experienced close air support pilots to serve as tactical coordinators and trainers. Your knowledge is invaluable, and what you demonstrated today shows that you can teach these principles to pilots from any airframe. Would you consider returning to service in an advisory capacity? We need people who can think like you think, who can see solutions that save lives instead of just destroying targets." Emma looked at the pilot standing before her, then at the A-10s visible through the terminal windows. She had left the military seeking peace and anonymity. She had spent 3 hours on a commercial flight trying to be invisible, trying to leave behind the responsibility and the weight of combat aviation. But when the call came, when lives were at stake, she had not hesitated. She had done exactly what she had always done, she had found a way to protect people who needed protection. "Colonel Martinez, can I think about it?" "Of course, Captain. Take all the time you need. But remember that the skills you have, the experience you carry, the instincts you demonstrated today, those are rare and valuable. The military invested 12 years training you to be the best close air support pilot possible. Today you showed that investment continues to pay dividends even after you retire. We would be honored to have you back in any capacity you're comfortable with." The pilots escorted Emma through the terminal, drawing curious looks from travelers who wondered why a woman in civilian clothes was being accompanied by 6 military pilots and a colonel. At the terminal exit, the A-10 pilots insisted on one final gesture. They stood at attention and rendered a formal salute to their former squadron member, holding it until Emma returned the honor. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez said quietly, "Reaper 6, you can take the pilot out of the warthog, but you can't take the warthog out of the pilot. You proved that today. The 75th Fighter Squadron is proud to claim you as one of our own, now and always. If you ever need anything, you call us. That's a promise from your squadron." As Emma walked away from the terminal, she pulled out her phone and saw dozens of messages from former military colleagues who had heard about the mission. News traveled fast in the close air support community. Her actions had already become a story that would be told in ready rooms and training sessions, an example of how A-10 principles could be adapted to any situation by a pilot who truly understood the mission. She thought about Colonel Martinez's offer as she hailed a taxi. 3 hours ago she had been trying to disappear, to be invisible, to leave behind the intensity of military aviation. But the truth was that she had never really left. The training was too deep, the commitment too strong, the instinct to protect too powerful. When F-16 pilots cried for help and A-10s roared in response, Reaper 6 had answered the call without hesitation. Emma smiled slightly as the taxi pulled away from the airport. The businessman in seat 17A had been right. She was not just a passenger. She would never be just a passenger. She was an A-10 pilot, trained to provide close air support to anyone who needed it, using whatever tools were available, from wherever she happened to be. That mission did not end with retirement. It was who she was at the most fundamental level. Her phone buzzed with one final message, this one from Falcon 1. Reaper 6, just landed back at base. My squadron commander wants to know if you would consider giving a guest lecture on adaptive close air support tactics. We told him about what you taught us today and he said it should be part of our training curriculum. Would you be willing? Emma smiled slightly as she looked out the taxi window at the A-10 still visible on the military ramp. The businessman in seat 17A had been right. She was not just a passenger. She would never be just a passenger. She was an A-10 pilot, and when F-16 pilots cried for help, Reaper 6 had answered the call. The silence was over. The mission continued. And somewhere over a battlefield she had never physically visited, civilian lives continued because a quiet woman on a commercial flight remembered that A-10 pilots never stop being A-10 pilots, no matter where they sit or how much time passes.